Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all. Those who are here physically and those who are online, welcome everybody. Congratulations, Fulbright, on 65 or the 65th birthday. Really, it's an organization that embodies the long history of U.S.-Egypt economic and cultural relationship. I'm sure you're looking for another 65 years. I'm 65. I'm not looking for another 65. But before we start, I would like to turn this over to His Excellency Dr. Ashraf Hatem, the Chairman of the Supreme Council of Universities, to welcome you all.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second round of table for the 65th anniversary for the Fulbright in Egypt. And as we were in our first meeting, we were speaking about education, and this meeting will speak about the Egyptian economy, and we are here in the we are hosted by the AmCham in Egypt, and this is after the Egyptian Economic Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we are all hopeful that this will be a great success for the Egyptian economy. Of course, as we said in the first meeting, that Fulbright started in Egypt in 1949. It was just 4 years after Fulbright started in the USA. In USA, it started in 1945. And we have a lot of scholars coming from the USA to Egypt and from Egypt to the USA. We have more than 6,000 Fulbrighters from Egyptian Fulbrighters going to the USA. Many of them became very eminent in the Egyptian economy and in the Egyptian government. I'll not be longer than this, and I'll go back to Mr. Hisham for his speech about the economy, and thank you very much for hosting us.
Thank you for being with us, sir. Before I start, I'd just like to welcome our two distinguished speakers. Dr. Khalid Ismail, he is the Willard Brown Chair at the AUC 2014-2015 and head of the African Academic Association on Entrepreneurship. He's the founder and chairman of Kiangel, Angel, an angel investment fund focused on investing in early-stage startups in the Middle East. He's a serial entrepreneur. I won't say more than that. It's all in front of you, so please look at that. On my left here is a distinguished Texan, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Gamal, is the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at the AUC. He holds a joint appointment at Rice University, I said Texan, as Professor of Economics and Statistics and Endowed Chair in Islamic Economics, Finance, and Management. Again, his full bio is in front of you. Please, let's just welcome everybody here. Being the moderator and I have the microphone, I will go ahead and say a few words. I will just say a few words on the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt, and then we'll talk a little about the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, and then we'll turn it over to our distinguished speakers. If many of you might not know, AmCham was started in 1981 as the first American Chamber of Commerce in the Middle East, and the 44th around the world. There are now 115 AmChams around the world, affiliated all to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C. Our current membership in AmCham Egypt is 1,800 members, but we're also the secretariat for the American Chambers in the MENA region. So we are the secretariat for 8 other AmChams in the region. And we serve them out of here, so we serve 3,500 members. Our mission is very simple. It's to promote trade and investment between Egypt and the United States. And we do that focus on 4 points. One of them is awareness, making our members aware of issues that could affect their business and how they can make use of all the laws and regulations and so on that do affect their business. We have many publications and we hold many events, all geared to making our members and their guests aware of what's going on. We do advocacy, which means that we advocate on behalf of our membership and the private sector to make Egypt a business-friendly country. We also advocate in the United States for the same thing. We work through 19 sectorial committees. So we have a Trade and Investment Committee, Industry Committee, Environment Committee, Legal, Customs, et cetera, and we do position papers, and we work very closely with other institutions in Egypt and the United States. In Egypt, whether it's the Federation of Egyptian Industries, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, and others to combine our work together. Networking and connecting people. We're known for connecting people together, and a lot of people join our institution and others to connect with other people, and I'm so happy to connect with everybody here, and I hope we'll continue our connection. This is the fun part of being part of associations. And of course, services. We offer many services to our members, basically in the education field. We are the examination site, and we do preparatory courses for 14 U.S. certificates, mainly in the financial and human resources field. And we do the preparatory courses and exams for that. We have many management courses, AmCham management courses, soft skills, etc. But also we have a lot of online training. We have over 100 online courses and training on that. So moving into technology. Our door knock, if you haven't heard about the door knock is basically our mission to the United States that we do every year. We used to do once a year, every year, a major trip to the United States, basically Egyptian companies, American companies going to Washington and other cities to tell the story about Egypt and how the private sector is doing in Egypt and what our experiences, etc. So this is a really flagship effort on our behalf to work with the United States on engaging the U.S. in a win-win situation. So during the last few visits, and especially after June 2013, when we used to go to the United States, everything we read in the United States was negative. Everything was negative. And we thought, this can't be right. There are really good stories in Egypt. And why don't we tell those stories? So we came back and surveyed our companies. Okay, guys, how are you doing? And during the last 4 years, none of our companies closed, none of our companies left. Very few let go some of their employees. So it was a good story. And in fact, some of them are growing, some of them are investing. And so in spite of it all, it's been a good story. So we decided in December 2013 to launch a campaign in the United States. And we called it Egypt for Business Campaign. Basically taking all the stories, all the good stories that our American companies or Egyptian companies are telling us, and going out to the media in the United States and positioning those stories. We forgot about the Washington Post and the New York Times, and we went for sectorial. So what do? We took the good stories of the banks, and we went to the Banker magazine. We took the good stories on textiles, and we went to Fashion magazine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we were quoted, and many of our members have been quoted, and it went over to Huffington Post, for instance, and The Economist, and so on. And we continue to do that. And then we decided that just talking about it is not enough. So we brought our members in front of a camera, just like this one, and we said, okay, tell your story. Are you here? Are you happy? Are you investing? And we have over 20 stories about investing in Egypt, and companies saying they're growing, they're excited about being in Egypt, and they will invest more. And after that, what we were very happy, and this will take me a segue to the conference. When the conference was announced, we were thrilled at participating or supporting this conference. The leadership of AmCham and the Egypt-US Business Council were appointed as ambassadors for the conference, and we went into the United States and talked about the conference. But also they took our testimonials from our website and they put it on the conference website. So that was something that we could do and support in many ways. To move into the conference, we thought what this conference is going to be about. Is it going to be a political conference? Is it going to be an economic conference? Is it going to be a projects financing conference? What is it? And we had many, many discussions with the government and with others, and what should it be? It actually ended up being everything. It became a political event conference where really the support of many governments, not just the Arabs. Of course, the Gulf countries were the leaders in supporting Egypt and talking about Egypt. But then we had representatives of over 80 countries present at the conference. We had, if you want to measure the conference by the number of participants, it was overwhelming. There were 2,500 guests and speakers, etc. The first plenary session, there was no place for everybody. The place can only take 1,800, and we actually told our members to please give your seats to foreign investors who are here, and that's why we're having this conference. So it was from the number of participants, a success. We started, we were the first event in the conference with a breakfast with Secretary Kerry, and it was attended by 450 people, and he spoke very well, except for the slip of the tongue. But he really did make, later. But he really did make significant statements about the support of the U.S. To Egypt. And I think that was something, Secretary Kerry is one of those who really supports Egypt and is pushing for more engagement. And then if you gauge the success of the conference on the kind of panels or content, and I think that was the highlight, quite honestly, for me. The kind of people who were on the panels in the conference were so high class and not high class, I mean high caliber, yes, thank you. When you have the chairman and CEO of General Electric, Jeff Imlett, when you have the chairman and CEO of British Petroleum, when you have the chairman and CEO of Siemens, when you have the chairman and CEO of Unilever, when you have the CEO of British Gas, when you have Dr. Mohammed Al-Aryan, whom I have a soft spot for, and one of the great Egyptians on the field. And then when you have the international finance institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the EBRD, the European Investment Bank, the African Development Bank, the IFC, I mean, all these institutions came to say, we're going to support Egypt, we're here for Egypt, and we're ready. And that itself was quite an incredible testament to what Egypt stands for. The number of contracts and MOUs that were signed, so the contracts that are binding agreements, MOUs are hopefuls, maybes. I think those are quite extensive and very important to the development of Egypt. I was also impressed, actually, I don't know why I'm surprised, but I was, the quality of presentations by the Egyptian government. The Egyptian government made very good presentations, whether it was the Minister of Planning, whether the central bank governor, or whether the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister. They really were all very, very well prepared. And really had their points made across. The last, but I thought was very important, was the organization of the event. We do 140 events a year in Egypt as AmCham, apart from the ones outside. And this was one of the most well-prepared and really well-managed event in Sharm, making use of a huge multinational company like WPP, and just the backdrop and the way everything clicked was wonderful. I think it's the Chamber and AmCham and the Egypt for Business campaign has a lot to do now. I think there needs to be a lot more talked about the conference worldwide and in the US especially. I don't think it has taken its fair share of exposure in the United States, and that's something we'll be working on. Of course, what's next? I think the private sector and the government have to decide how they're going to implement all these opportunities and projects, and to continue the reform. I don't think the conference should be the end game, but it should be the start. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much for being with us. And now I'll turn it over to Khalid Ismail to make a few comments.
Thank you, Shem, and thank you all for being here. Let me start by just a disclaimer, because I want to make sure that this doesn't get misunderstood. I'm not here representing the President's Advisory Board. It's something I'm honored to do, but I do not sit here reflecting the board's decisions or opinions. I will reflect my personal, just to be careful about this part. And the other one is another important disclaimer, is I'm not an economist by education or anything. My dear friend Mahmoud is definitely one, and we'll all enjoy hearing his opinions. I'm just...
Can I just interrupt you for a second? I'd like to ask people who are online to please send in their questions before 7 p.m. So you've got 30 minutes to send in your questions. And for those here, please, you have forms there to please fill out your questions as we go on. Excuse me, Khalid.
That's okay.
Will you take our suggestions to the council, to the president?
If they are good. Only if they are good. I think Hisham did a good job covering a lot of things about the conference, and I don't want to repeat any of that, but Let me just clarify that the economy is in part numbers that cannot fool anybody. You can go through a lot of numbers and indicators, etc. And then in part it's perception. It's how people feel about it, which is an important part. And on my way every morning back and forth to the conference, I did not stay in a hotel near it, but far. I had the opportunity to talk to the taxi driver who took me each way, a different taxi driver every day. And that's where I felt the perception part or the emotional part on that level of a taxi driver, of a layman living in Sharm, who has witnessed the city from being, the major attraction point of tourism 5 years ago to a decline that is really sad for a city of the beauty of Sharm el-Sheikh. And he felt euphoric about it. He said, my mother is sitting next to the TV every day since you guys started. He kept praying for me. He thought I'm going to do something very important there. And he said, Rabbina ma'aku, God bless you. I mean, it was so sincere, I have to say, to the level that I felt there is a moral boost happening here. There is an adrenaline boost that this conference did to the Egyptian people and maybe to the economy. So if that was an important part of it, then it was definitely achieved. Okay, I would say 100% of the emotional, the euphoric part about it, etc., and the boost was achieved. I would say also that political support to Egypt was demonstrated there, which was very important again, maybe not direct effect on economy, but it definitely has an effect on the economy. However, at the end of the day, as I said, there's a big portion of the economy that's numbers, that's things that have to happen. And there are lessons learned as well. I mean, we have been through times where the economy was growing. Between 2004 and 2008, the macroeconomic indicators were actually quite good in Egypt. However, a lot of people were falling out of the middle society. The numbers I have are around 10 million people became poorer, and only 2 million people were added to the middle society during that phase of great economic growth. So we cannot ignore that things can happen that look good on the face, but do not really reflect throughout. And in the conference, we heard the word inclusion quite often, which was music to my ears, at least to hear it, which means we were not just looking at economic development, but also how to include the larger society into that growth. When things happen and happen well, we'd like to see the youth, the poor, etc., who were really not served very well in the era of 2004 to 2008. We'd like to see those really being included in the growth, getting opportunities, and so on. So I'm not focused very much, although it was great to see big projects being signed. Energy problems will be resolved with the amount of energy that we heard coming from at least Siemens and GE. I think this will really reduce our energy crisis significantly over the next 5 years. So that's all very good. But there is still a lot of work to be done on two grounds that I would like to highlight. One is the regulatory and the role of the government as a regulator, simplifying things. The government bureaucracy that really stands as a major barrier in front of a lot of people, investors, etc., but more so in front of small startups, in front of SMEs, and so on. The big tycoons can always find their way. The big companies know how to deal with bureaucracies. Guess what? GE and Siemens have operated in more bureaucratic conditions than Egypt, for sure, and they managed to find their way through. The problem is always with the smaller companies, the startups, the SMEs, and so on, who really cannot pay the price of difficult regulations, and I would dare saying corruption, because there is a big cost of corruption. Now, these are issues that we need to deal with. It was touched upon in the conference. There were several laws and things being prepared for the conference and were done really last minute, and luckily we managed to do them because they were very important, like modifications to the investment law, etc. But honestly, this is only the beginning. The amount of change in law and in regulatory things that the government needs to focus on is immense. And without those, and to me this is the major role of the government, not to conduct projects, not to go and do feasibility study of a project and implement it, but rather to facilitate to the private sector its operation. And when I say private sector, I underline again the inclusiveness, the small and medium, the entrepreneurs, the youth, etc., not just the big companies who can manage with or without. I personally, I'm very much engaged with entrepreneurship and youth and startups in Egypt. For the last 4 years at least, I've been sitting almost on a daily basis with young people who have ideas. I not only wait for them to come to Cairo, I went to Aswan, I went to Luxor, I went to Tanta, I went to Port Said. So I do travel this country from south to north to meet young people and see how they think about the future, what kind of ideas they have. And those who have ideas, we encourage them. I help them in finance, but I also help them to mentorship and through mentorship. There was a session in the conference regarding entrepreneurship, which was well attended, which was, you know, one of the highlights to me at least, that it got at least some attention. However, it was a side session with 120 attendees, not the 2,000 attendees, not in the main room, and not coming from a strategic point of view that this is a must-have, that SMEs' contribution to the GDP in Egypt is still extremely low, and we need it to go up, and here are the measures that we will take to make sure that this happens. The numbers I have again is that SMEs in Egypt contribute no more than 20% to the GDP, while in countries like Germany or Italy, it's close to 75% of GDP. So we still have a big gap of contribution to the GDP that should be coming from small and medium, and they are the ones who create jobs as well. This is very important. We have a problem of job creation, and we need to deal with it. And permanent jobs, productive jobs. When you talk about jobs that relate to building real estate, for instance, these are good jobs, but these are temporary. These are, you know, within the time frame, 5 years, I'm going to build this tower, and the jobs end. So there is a difference between that kind of job and a job of somebody sitting in on a manufacturing line for 20 years, 30 years, producing things, hopefully also exporting them, and so on. So therefore, I would say, as much I was very happy with the overall outcome of the conference, I felt like agriculture and manufacturing needed to be addressed more properly, and we still have a challenge there. We need to produce things, we need to be able to be competitive in production and hopefully exports and minimize our imports, both when it comes to finished goods as well as to agriculture at large. So those are two sectors that today together combined constitute like 45% of the GDP of the country, need to be improved and become more efficient. And a lot of that could come through the small and medium. And we need to really look at how we can help small and medium enterprises. Entrepreneurship is one aspect of starting up companies, but in my mind, it's more related to, you know, the high growth, high risk, high growth potential companies, and those do not necessarily create a lot of that many jobs, but they are very important for, you know, creating wealth, creating opportunities that are not common to the normal SMEs and so on. So I think that the next things to come are going to judge really the success of the conference rather than say it was or was not successful. I think on the perception, on the emotional, on the support, on the political aspects, all of that, yes, we're done. On the economy, I think we still have a long way to go, and the conference is the springboard for that. It's the stepping stone that we would like to use to do more steps, more regulatory, more simplifying the laws. Why can't I just open a company online like I do almost anywhere in the world today? I have to go through so many steps. I have to pay such a high amount of money and wait for so long until I have a startup. I'm not allowed to share an apartment with another startup in this country if you know the rule. You have to have your own address. If you start sharing space, you can't have a company. A lot of very stupid, simple things that can be really fixed very easily that will entice people to go. And we complain that we have a lot of economy belonging to the gray economy. And the reason is simple, because they are afraid to belong to the official formal economy, because what is being done to small and medium enterprises, once they belong to it, what you hear about taxes and all of these things is something you would rather avoid. So we have a challenge to include that gray economy in an enticing way, not just tell them, oh, we'll just give you a reduced tax. I think we need to entice them. I need to help them, because they will be the job creators of the future. Entrepreneurs, I think we have a very good ecosystem that has evolved over the last 4 years, from angel investors to VCs to mentorship to NGOs. A lot of players are coming together to support entrepreneurs in this country. And I'm positive about that, because in 4 years what we've managed to achieve is phenomenal, I would say. Don't compare it to Bay Area or USA and so on. That's unfair, because they had 60 years to do what they did, and we only had 4. So with respect to the time frame that all of this was achieved in, which is 4 years, I would say I'm very positive that this will carry a small piece of the economy forward. The rest, I think, will be SMEs. The big companies will always be there, and nobody ignores the big companies as players in the German economy, for instance, the Mercedes and the Siemens and so on. But a lot of people don't even realize that 80% of the German economy is coming from small and medium. And we need to really think in that direction. So I don't want to dwell much deeper, because we have an economist here. But I'm really happy to address any questions you may have related to these topics. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll move it to Dr. Gamal. Shall I mention your fame? His fame with me is that his wife used to work for me at the Amcham.
Yes, the best thing I ever received from Amcham. Well, thank you, Shem. And the topic I was given, which I think Khaled assigned me, was the price of oil and its influence on upcoming plans in Egypt. So I'll split my remarks in 3 pieces. The first is on the price of oil, which is something I've written quite a bit about over the past decade. And then I'll talk about the plans in Egypt and then the relationship between the two. So on the price of oil, one thing that many people don't recognize is that most of the time what's happening to the price of oil is really more about the dollar than it is about oil per se. So if you look historically at periods when oil prices were very high, you will find that the highest periods were before the world went on the gold standard in 1880. So you'll find very, very high prices in 1860 and 1870. And then you'll see slightly high prices again right after World War I until Glass-Steagall came in place. And then, of course, after World War II, we had the Bretton Woods Accord, and the whole world was de facto on a gold standard. Everybody was pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. Then you get spikes in oil prices starting in '73 after President Richard Nixon decided to close the gold window, and the dollar was basically backed by nothing. As Volcker put it later, it was a big surprise that people turned out to be more willing to hold dollars backed by nothing than dollars backed by gold. But basically, we had a period of very high prices, '73, '79, until Paul Volcker came into the Fed and raised interest rates and put in place financial regulation again. Then we had a period of low oil prices, strong dollar. And then, of course, '98, the dollar starts falling and oil prices start rising. And then 2003, with the Iraq invasion, oil prices skyrocket. And we stayed sort of in that range for a while until very recently, mainly because financial laxity kept increasing. So we had very lax financial regulation both at home and globally. And there was a geopolitical story about the Middle East. So '73 was really a story. It wasn't about an Arab embargo. It was a technical problem in the Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia. But it just happened to coincide with the time of the October Arab-Israeli war. And so the story sounded good. It was really the case of the dollar all of a sudden not being backed by gold, and there was a story to justify prices jumping. '79, legitimately, was the fear, with the Iranian Revolution, that there may be a Gulf War, something that we have to think about nowadays. But basically, there is an underlying business cycle in the energy sector. When prices are high, you build a lot of capacity. Then by the time the economy starts to slow down, you have excess capacity, so price plummets, so you stop investing just in time for the economy to start recovering, and all of a sudden there's a shortage, so price rises again and so on. But then that's amplified by financial markets and usually some sort of geopolitical story, which we lived through recently again. I'll get back to that when I talk about the situation now and what may be the scenarios we may be observing over the next few years. But let me switch gears and go to the next point, which is the Egyptian economy. And so again, it was the price of oil and the influence on upcoming plans in Egypt. And I have to preface what I'm going to say about the upcoming plans by telling you a short story that in summer 2011, I was about to fly back to Texas when Ahmed Galal, who runs Economic Research Forum, before that he was running the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies. And he asked me if I'd stay a couple of extra days because we had an important workshop, so I stayed. And so he was there, and Hazim Blawi was there receiving calls from SCAF throughout. A few days later, he became Minister of Finance and so on. And everybody was talking about what they think the Egyptian economy should do. And so Hazim Blawi was saying he just received his revolutionary stripes by going to Tahrir Square and so on. And my message was, stay the course. We don't know anything better than what we've been doing. And everybody said, well, that doesn't sound very revolutionary and so on. But really, we don't know any better than what Egypt was doing from 2000 to 2008, even 2010. And yes, the so-called Joe Stiglitz called it the post-Washington consensus. So the original Washington consensus was that we don't know any system better than free market enterprise. And the new Washington consensus says, well, take that and add to it social safety nets and an emphasis on improving institutions, so things like reducing corruption and so on. But it's really just a revamped Washington consensus. This is the best we know. We don't know of any better system. Is it flawed? Yes. Does it lead to temporary inequality and so on? Yes. But we don't know of anything better to bring a country into a higher income bracket. So the upcoming plans, economic plans for Egypt, as far as I can see, is going back to the plans of the previous decade, which is fine as far as I'm concerned because we don't know of anything better. And I characterize that as a hybrid of the Chinese and Dubai models. So the problem of Egypt fundamentally is very low savings rates. You have a country that needs to grow quickly, which means it needs to have investment as a percentage of gross domestic product that's at least 25%, hopefully above 30%, but you only save 15%. So you need to bridge the savings gap somehow. And the way to do that could be to borrow, but most recently the model, the Chinese/Dubai model has been, well, the Dubai model is more borrowing, the Chinese model is more foreign direct investment. This model has its flaws for Egypt because unlike China, we don't have, I mean, China has a high savings rate, and then a lot of the savings get funneled through the American financial system by buying treasury bonds, which depresses interest rates, which allows companies to borrow cheaply to invest in China to export to the US. So it was what Larry Summers called the balance of financial terrors. That works for China because it has the high savings that are being recycled back through foreign direct investment. We don't have that. Dubai had a combination of foreign direct investment from the rest. So it's basically a secondary recipient of petrodollars. Yeah, inside the Emirates, obviously Abu Dhabi is the one that gets the petrodollars, but they get also petrodollars from Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. We are at best in Egypt tertiary recipients of petrodollars. If you look in the 1980s, the surge in investment in Egypt was in the late 80s, well past the surges in the primary recipients and secondary recipients of petrodollars. You see the next surge in 2003, and the surge in Egypt happens in 2005, and it's much, much smaller because by then, number one, countries like Saudi Arabia have much higher populations and therefore don't have the kinds of excess petrodollars that they used to have in the 80s. And financial markets are much more sophisticated now, so they allow them to invest in a variety of different ways rather than just lending to developing countries, which is the way in the 1980s petrodollars were recycled, then leading to sovereign debt crises. In the 2000s, of course, it was the real estate crisis. So the brilliant CEO of Citibank in the early 1980s said that countries never go out of business, so they were a good credit risk, and therefore lending to developing countries was always a good idea. And then the brilliant bankers of the mid-2000s thought house prices always go up, so it's always good to lend to mortgagors. So we're going back to, so the fact that we're doing economic reforms is good, but we have to remember that in 2008, so from 2006 to 2008, the World Bank and the IFC were rating Egypt the best reformer in the region. In 2008, it was the best reformer in the world. Yusuf Boutros-Ghali at the time was anointed the chair of the IMFC, which means he was the star minister of finance of any developing country of the time. So Egypt was doing all the things that we knew were good. The economy turned, and that's just the nature of private enterprise. There's risk, and sometimes things go sour, and you stay the course and hope to keep raising per capita GDP, and eventually your social safety nets should rise and help others. I should say something about the exchange rates also. One of the things that in the 2000s would have worked, and certainly worked for India and worked for Egypt, depreciating the pound, for India obviously it was the rupee, helps to improve your competitive advantage. We happen to be in a period now when the dollar is rising, all developing countries are depreciating their currencies, and our primary trading partner is Europe. Which is not going to grow anytime soon, and therefore there isn't really a market for export-led growth. I mean, we can still pull that out of the textbook, but the timing isn't right for it. So, I mean, that's the problem. You invite a dismal scientist, and you get a dismal assessment. I think Egypt is doing all the right things now, but it doesn't look very promising. So. Unlike the 1980s and 2000s, don't expect the last surge of petrodollars, which is now waning because of the decline in oil prices, to really bring a lot of investment. And $12.5 billion is not a whole lot of money, given what we burned through the last 3 years. In the short to medium term, there are two scenarios. One of them, which is unlikely, but, and I'm not sure if it's good or bad, is that there will be another surge in petrodollars. Now, the only way this happens is for oil prices to skyrocket again. That requires a combination of continued lax monetary policy, which means that Fed Chairman Janet Yellen doesn't decide to raise interest rates in the medium term, as she should, and the story about potential disruption of oil flow from the Middle East gets more traction. So that cannot just be an altercation in Syria or Yemen. I mean, Bab el-Mandab, only about 3 million barrels a day pass through there. The big problem is the Straits of Hormuz. That's where 17 million barrels pass per day, roughly, in 2013. But we see that the players, so if you're an oil exporter, a little bit of strife is good for business because it adds a premium to the oil price. And so when the GCC countries were giving Egypt money from 2011 onwards, I said, well, they're just recycling the money back. If Saudi Arabia is producing 9 million barrels a day, exporting 7 million of these, and the so-called Arab Spring raised oil prices by $2, well, that's $14 million a day, so what you have to do is give us that amount and you're breaking even. So a little bit of strife is good, but you don't want it to be near the Straits of Hormuz. So when things started Bahrain, you move it to Syria or you move it to Yemen, far away from where it could really hurt everybody. But there is a possibility that an all-out war will break out, like the Iran-Iraq war between 80 and 88, where actual infrastructure was destroyed. That will disrupt the flow of oil. Or if the Straits of Hormuz or Bab el-Mandab or other areas become affected, that's highly unlikely. And if it happens, it's probably a catastrophic scenario, but it will produce a lot of petrodollars, which in the medium term may lead to a flow of investment funds to Egypt. But again, we saw 2 episodes in the 80s and then in the 2000s, and with every episode, the amount that comes to Egypt from petrodollars is declining. So even in that scenario, I wouldn't count on it too much. Then there is the bad scenario, which is that US monetary policy starts tightening, as well it should, and the trade partners continue to stagnate because their economies can't recover. I mean, part of the problem really in the last 4 or 5 years is that every major recession, global recession after World War II, was followed by very low oil prices, and that spurred a recovery, global recovery. In this period, because the world was out of assets, one of the asset classes they all invested in were commodity futures, including oil. And that kept oil prices high and choked the global recovery. So we're going to suffer through that. Europe is stagnating. India is going to start to stagnate. China is already starting to stagnate. So we don't have very promising prospects in the short to medium term, I hate to say. In the long term, there's really a big question mark in my mind. Does anybody want Egypt to succeed? I mean, there are many people who don't want Egypt to fail. So the GCC doesn't want Egypt to fail. The US doesn't want Egypt to fail. But I'm not sure if anybody really wants Egypt to succeed. And I'll leave it at that. I mean, it's possible to work through the geopolitics and the parallels to past episodes and so on. Now, to get to inclusive growth, because this is, by the way, a mantra that Egypt and everybody else had been on since the mid-2000s. And I attended numerous conferences by Egyptian Center. I even wrote a paper on SME, methods of finance, and so on. So it's not like we've discovered inclusive growth. It's something that sounds good. Nobody knows how to do it. Nobody knows how to do it. Small and medium enterprises do not help you grow. And they rely on large enterprises for subcontracting and for financing through things like reverse factoring and so on, because they have the credible credit scores, et cetera. So a Mercedes-Benz or a Porsche can subcontract a lot of the seat leather stitching to small and medium enterprises. But you can't sort of bring an economy from the bottom up with SMEs. As a matter of fact, if you look at the proportion of SMEs, it tends not to correlate very well with economic performance. So it sounds good. Nobody knows how to do it. We have an entire region with absurdly high rates of financial disintermediation. So I'm afraid what we are going to see in the next few years is a poorer version of the 2004 to 2008 scenario. But it's the best we have. The alternative is catastrophic. So that's sort of the positive spin I can put on it. That's it.
Thank you. Do we take them from here? Okay, so we've got some questions here. It's the first time I've seen them quickly, but Dr. Gamal, as an economist, do you think that the Egyptian struggling economy is able to handle the mega projects just like those identified in the conference? Is the heavy industrial economy still viable as a model to rescue suffering economies? If yes, in what way? For all, do you think that the international investors have doubts and fears about the legal and justice system in Egypt when it comes to evaluating the legal risk, read the potential investments? How is Egypt handling and managing the impact of the so-called renationalization verdicts that were issued in State Council over the last few years? That's. You want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So mega projects are good to kick off economic activity. They run, the countries that do that run the risk of crowding out private investment. So one mega project, two are okay, but when you have too many of them, the mega projects, even those that will bring large funds from outside, will probably borrow large amounts as well from banks in order to boost profitability, and that in a system that is highly disintermediated, that crowds out private investment and doesn't bode well for long-term growth. So they're good in the short term, but you need at some point to pass the mantle on to the private sector. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. A lot of the mega projects, of course, are in energy and construction, which relies a lot on cement, and that's very energy intensive, very capital intensive, doesn't create a lot of jobs. And then for all, I guess I'll say something quick about it. Are they worried about legal and justice systems? Yes, of course.
Sorry. Did the economic conference discuss inclusive growth for women? And what laws and policies do you recommend to enhance women's entrepreneurship opportunities, especially those in underprivileged communities?
Honestly, I don't know where the question came from, but
From a woman.
who knows? As somebody who's really worked very hard with hundreds, I would dare saying hundreds of entrepreneurial companies and thousands of entrepreneurs in this country, a surprising thing that a lot of people, even in the US, didn't even believe me when I said it, is that 35% of those whom I met were women, including places like Luxor and Aswan, which are very conservative societies. I went to a startup weekend in Luxor. There were 200 attendees, and 80 of them were women. So if you go to the Bay Area, you don't find more than 15% of the founders of startups being women. Yet in Egypt, I see 35%. So I don't see a problem. I mean, women have equality in the Constitution, and they are as good, sometimes better than men when it comes to entrepreneurship and startups. They don't need special laws. They don't need anything. I've met really very bright young women in this country that makes us all very proud. So why do we want to treat them as minorities or give them any different rights? They have the right, and they take the right, and they do perform. I personally invested in 12 companies. 5 of them are run by women, and I didn't make that up or anything. It just happened that 5 out of the best 12 I invested in were women. So I really don't see any need to overemphasize this topic.
There's a comment, Khalid, that the construction industry is very important for the economy. It is not just building a tower and jobs are over when the tower is finished. It is the driver of 100 factories and manufacturers, that it is a booster of the economy.
Not against it. I mean, of course we need to build. I mean, we need to live in apartments and everything. Don't take me wrong. I'm just saying we need to look at the cost of a job opportunity. That's a very important measure we need to look at. How much did it cost me to create this job opportunity? We need at least 3 to 5 million jobs in the next 3 to 4 years. Where and how can we generate? If every one of these costs us, let's say, $100,000, you do the math. $100,000 times 3 million jobs, how much is that? And can we generate that amount of money or borrow it or anything? And the answer is probably no. So we need to look at creating jobs with the most highest efficiency. In software, for instance, you can create a job for 20,000 pounds. In a steel manufacturing line, you need $120,000. A huge difference. And in construction, at least not in construction, I just had this discussion with a very famous retail investor in Egypt. He comes from Dubai. And he didn't know the math, but when we worked the math out, it costs 150,000 pounds to generate one job for a person to stand in a retail shop and sell something. Is that better, or 7 software development jobs, for instance? That's the way I would measure and compare, rather than say this is a good industry or this is a bad industry. So again, if anybody misunderstood me, I'm not against, because there is building material and there is a lot of things that are important to us. But I'm just saying, is this what's going to boost the Egyptian economy to the way or in levels we need? And my answer is probably not through these buildings, but rather in a different way.
Dr. Gamal, many U.S. analysts and I believe that the Arab oil embargo in 1973 was the reason for the rise of oil prices at that time. We should not undermine the effect of the embargo. You were saying there was no real embargo.
Yeah, read Dan Yergin's The Prize.
What's it?
Daniel Yergin, The Prize.
What does it say? We want an answer.
No, it started out with a technical problem in the Ghawar field, and it was also when OPEC all of a sudden discovered, I mean, OPEC had already existed for a number of years, all of a sudden they discovered they had power. So yes, they did have an embargo afterwards, but most of the jump was really because of the dollar being delinked from gold at the time when the U.S. was overspending and overextended because of Vietnam.
I'll try to summarize. It's a very long question, but basically it asks about what's going to happen next after the conference regarding all these obstacles that companies face when, particularly startups. It remains to be seen, of course. I think that's the challenge. And as a person, I will strongly and I will keep advocating automation and simplification of all the processes that the government deals with in this country. It's not rocket science to go and register your company online. We have 40 million people online in this country, so it's not anything out of the world to go and ask people to do that. Give them the permit. You want to do security checks? Give them the permit first. Do your security check. If you find something wrong, go and stop them. Don't do the other way around. Don't stop them until you do your security check. Simple things like that can really build speed into the country. More automation means less interaction face-to-face with government employees, which reduces corruption, which increases the efficiency, and so on. So every possible thing we need to do is to automate. we do not value, and this is very key and important, data. In Egypt, we don't have, we have not invested enough to create the right database for the information that we need. We don't have a clear database for the government assets. We don't have a database for us as individuals. We have a social security number and so on, but when you go to the registry for your car, you need something else, and when you go to register land, you need a third thing, and none of that really connects to the other. You need to automate and build a correct database where everything is linked together. This is the way you will collect taxes. This is the way you will help the poor as opposed to the rich. When it comes to subsidies, this is the way you can count the street children, which you are unable to count until today, and you see reports ranging from tens of thousands to millions, and we still don't know the count. I sat with one of the prime ministers of Egypt in the late 90s, and he said, I don't know whether we have 4,400 villages or 4,000 villages in this country. I did the math, and I said, the difference is about 4 million people that you may or may not know whether they exist. 4 million people were question marks to that prime minister. So again, I think we have a long way to go, but we need to start.
Dr. Gamal, you said that the Gulf and the US do not want Egypt to succeed. Do you think the Muslim Brotherhood want Egypt to succeed?
Yeah, Hisham asked me if I wanted to answer this one. I'm happy to. Not in the sense that you and I might want it to succeed. I mean, thinking about Egypt as a nation state and thinking about its success in the short to medium term, which we'll want to see as a step to long-term success, would not be something that religious groups of that type care about, because they're very millennialist in their thinking. They want success on their own terms rather than success per se. And therefore, if we're thinking of the Egypt of today as a nation state and its economic success, no, probably they want it to fail. So they'd be an exception. I said the US doesn't want Egypt to fail. I don't think the GCC wants Egypt to fail, but neither want it to succeed right now. The Muslim Brotherhood, for obvious reasons, want it to fail right now.
Okay, I have a question here related to how can we move innovative research in science and engineering in national universities from being paper-oriented research to an enterprise? Do you think this is possible? It's a tough one. I worked at Cairo University for 17 years. So, and finally resigned, and it's one of the decisions I never regretted. Honestly, we need a revamp of the entire education system, and innovation does not start at university. Innovation starts when you build the minds in kindergarten, in primary school, and so on. When we received students at Cairo University, and those were the elite, engineering, who had over 98% score in Sanawiyya, I was very disappointed year after year after year, seeing the level going downhill from one year to the next. And it was a downhill slope. No way, it's not picking up, and it's not improving until today. So to talk about research and science and say, yes, it's very important, let's do it, etc., I would be really cheating by saying that, because the fundamental problems are immense, and this is the frosting on the cake. I mean, research is when you're done with building good minds, good people, train them, etc., until they reach the level where they can conduct research and contribute innovation. But to ask for the frosting to be on top of mud, that's very, that's not right. So we need to fix a lot of things, and if the question is, yes, there is a 1% of those who graduate very sharp, very smart out of Egyptian universities, the answer is yes. Can we capitalize on those to do startups and to do innovation? The answer is yes. But then we're only dealing with, which is what Zuhail University, what Nile University are practically doing. They are picking and choosing the top elitist 1% smartest guys in this country and using them for very good research projects I saw some of them are really very good projects. However, these will not change the scene. These are very nice to have, but they are so small in percentage to everything we have that their impact will be so small until we fix the fundamentals of education.
The question here is in the field of occupational and environmental safety. More emphasis is now given to what is called healthy safety culture. Does the new vision include any major cultural changes both at the organizational and national levels? If so, what are the most important elements of such a change and how to achieve them?
I don't have a clue. This is a tough one. Let's skip it.
Okay. All right, so I'll summarize actually there's one about how do we take the advantage of the Fulbright experience for the development of Egypt?
Takes us off the hook. Yeah, exactly. Fulbright can answer.
Okay. Apply Fulbright experience? Okay. Let me summarize this one basically, and I think you, from this last one, is how do you see the vision for Egypt? What is your vision for Egypt? And what are the priorities for each of you? What do you think Egypt should concentrate on? Can it do everything at the same time? If not, what is the sequence of priorities?
I may differ with my friend Mahmoud in our level of optimism. I'm probably a little bit higher on optimism than he is, which is okay. We all have different. I'm not super optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic. But what makes me optimistic are the fundamentals of this country. I mean, the real fundamentals of its location, the real fundamentals of its people that I deal with, and I see how flexible they are, how innovative they are, and they can do things. Our main problems really, if I single out one thing, it's that government, that body that we have built up like a monster over 60 years, 7 million employees, really stifling this economy and the people and any enterprise by virtue of being there. If I can imagine this government becoming leaner, becoming more efficient, becoming more pragmatic, very cost-oriented. So if I am to say what can help the Egyptian economy and make me optimistic is that if we can do structural change, if we can do decentralization, you cannot rule this country anymore out of Cairo and then blame everybody for Upper Egypt not being developed. We've been doing that for 60 years, and we keep running things out of Cairo. We need to decentralize. We need to give the governorates some power to decide on its economics, on its growth, even on its taxation system, in part at least, and so on. So if we can adopt a quick reform of government structure, decentralization, I think there will be hope. The rest will come. The private sector is smart. Investors are looking for opportunities all over the world, and this country has investment opportunities. Tourism, we're really in our infancy when it comes to numbers compared to our potential. I mean, why is Dubai hosting more tourists than Egypt altogether, with all our heritage, monuments, Red Sea, Mediterranean, etc.? It doesn't make sense, except that we're a failure in terms of how we're running tourism over the last 60 years. So we need to structurally change this, and once we've done this, the fundamentals of this country, which are really superior, will pop up and allow us to grow. That's my vision.
So I agree on decentralization, but of course that will include more government, not less. I mean, I'm supposed to be the Texan. I'm supposed to be the one for small government. But I mean, it is actually the Egyptian government bureaucracy and the gray sector that kept this country afloat over the past 4 years. So we shouldn't underestimate their importance. Efficiency can be improved, but I think the only way for Egypt to succeed is to stop thinking that there's a silver bullet, that if only we bring enough investors, everything will be great. Because that has been the mantra for 15 years. And this is not going to work unless the country itself is consuming less, saving more, and investing in order to allow the incoming investment to leverage and get a high rate of return. That there is no way out. Even foreign direct investment that came, I had a paper with Mohammed Al-Arian 11 years ago, foreign direct investment, getting the basics right for the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies. And a lot of the foreign direct investment is just tariff hopping. It's trying to play the system in order to make a profit on a consumerist economy, which is very different from making profit from an economy that's developing a manufacturing sector and creating jobs and so on. And that will only work if the country stops living beyond its means, learns how to save, learns that it will take decades in order to catch up. I mean, I was born in the 60s, and I remember in my childhood that we were told that, in 1881, Egypt and Japan were on par, and if it weren't for the British occupation, we would have been, right there with Japan. But Korea is right here. We can keep up with Korea. And then, of course, we missed the boat on Korea, and then, China, we're going to stay with China, and then country after country after country, and now if Egypt can catch up with Bangladesh, I think would be doing well. No, I mean, I'm not joking. Bangladesh is a country that's doing quite well right now, or Vietnam. Many countries that we thought were not in our league are actually quite a bit ahead, but we're always thinking that we're better than we are. On education, I remember with the government in the 2000s, my brother, when he was asked about, we should hire these fancy professors from MIT and so on, he said, no, they cost too much, bring professors from India. And he said, no, but they're our competitors. And he said, well, I have news for you. If they're our competitors, we lost 50 years ago. So I think a sanity check, understanding where we are on the food chain, where we are at the stage of development, and that this is a stage where you need to save a lot so that our great-grandchildren can have a better life, is the way forward. Quickly jumping through many stages of development and trying to catch up that way doesn't work. Dubai can do it because it's a secondary recipient of petrodollars and gets bailed out by Abu Dhabi when it borrows too much. I don't know if next time they need $20 billion, Abu Dhabi would be able to oblige.
My last question. If you took the reins instead of Sisi, what would you have done different? Both of you.
I don't have a tenth of his IQ, so I have no idea.
You know what?
Obviously, it's a hypothetical question.
Give me a hypothetical answer.
It's a very tough burden that I cannot really think about carrying. It's really a tough burden to come to rule Egypt at this moment in time. I mean, we have to be very honest with everything around us. And I'm not a fan of overblowing the security agendas and so on, but it is a serious threat. What's happening around us, look at Libya, look at Syria, look at Yemen now, and and that all is side topic to the economy. So I really don't know what to do except for including as many good brains around me as much as I can. And because I would need tons of help. If I were in his shoes today, I would need tons of help. I would need brains like those who are sitting around this table and many, many more. And I would listen and use their advice and use their reports and build really different layers to support And there are a lot of people in Egypt who have good brains and who have proven that by traveling abroad and playing really significant roles in international institutions. And he has an advisory board that has very prominent people, Muhammad Al-Ariyan and Zuhail and Magdi Yaoub and so on. He needs to use them more. He has done different layers below that, and every time he can use these brains, I think they may help him at least. That's what I would do today. And I would include a good percentage of young people, young Egyptians. First, to give them hope that they will be here, that they have now a role to play and not just sit and watch those old people run the country on their behalf. Second, because as much as I work with them, I still learn from young people until today. Technology, for instance, is moving so fast that none of us can cope with everything that's happening. They do. Innovation, they don't have barriers, they don't have legacies. So if I was in his shoes, I would put a good percentage, 25, 30% of my surroundings from those young people, and hopefully then putting all those brains together, I can do something good.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Khaled. Thank you, everybody. I am the ultimate optimist. And I look forward for a great Egypt. Whether people want us to succeed or not, I think we're going to do it. Thank you very much.
Sorry, the camera doesn't move, so we have to play musical chairs. So, Adnan. I'd like to introduce Mr. Adnan Siddiqui, who's one of the board members and the treasurer at the Binational Fulbright Commission and a great friend and supporter of the commission.
Hello, everyone. Well, we just witnessed a fantastic dialogue and Q&A, and I must compliment the questioners as much as the speakers. That was very, I want to say entertaining, but no. No, it was actually very intellectually fulfilling to hear those responses and that analysis. I work for the American Embassy as well. I'm the public affairs officer for the embassy. My connection to Hisham was recently at Sharm el-Sheikh. We were together at the AmCham breakfast, and we also cooperate regularly with AmCham, especially our economic section does, and my public affairs section more and more is cooperating with AmCham. And of course, we work very closely with AUC and the faculty at AUC, and of course with Dr. Hatem at the Supreme Council. I just wanted to try to answer that one question that got unanswered, and that was about the Fulbright experience, right? So I grew up in a Fulbright family. My father was a Fulbrighter. And then when I became a diplomat, I served on 4 different Fulbright boards around the country. So I know a little bit about the Fulbright experience. And we actually answered that question through other answers which I heard. All of you were speaking about, for example, you spoke about inclusion, right? And you spoke about decentralization. And those are 2 things that we always try in our selection committees when we select these scholars to go to the United States or American scholars to come to Egypt. We always try to find people from all walks of society. It doesn't matter what your background is. We want to be as inclusive as possible. And we select people who are not only very qualified in terms of their academic qualifications, but people who have an open mind and who are willing to share their experience, cultural experience, social experience with the other side. And so, to me, that is very important for the Fulbright legacy, is to share ideas openly and to listen and to absorb. And we need that in our educational systems in order to then contribute something to the economy. And in my line of business, I see a lot of Egyptian students and young graduates of universities who are looking for opportunities to contribute to society. And if you read some of Senator Fulbright's writings, he talks a lot about social entrepreneurship, giving back to society, volunteerism, not always looking for jobs that pay, but sometimes non-paying jobs or part-time jobs, whatever it takes to give back to your communities, and also, pick up some good experience. Development takes a long time. There are no shortcuts. We all try to find the shortcuts, but we have to remind ourselves that it takes people. It takes good people to move an economy, an educated population to move an economy. And we feel at the embassy and on this Fulbright board that Egypt is on its way, that you have all the tools. You have the people, you have the resources, and you have the motivation to move ahead. And I think everyone who attended that summit in Sharm el-Sheikh felt that way, not just the cab driver or the other people who were just sitting there. So we feel good about working in this field, and this is my first webinar. I haven't been on a webinar before, so it's good to see that we are reaching out to not only people in this room, but to people online. And that's the wave of the future is connections, as Hisham first mentioned as he started out, that connecting and networking is what it's all about. So I want to thank Maggie for asking me to come to this event and for speaking a little while. And I look forward to seeing all of you in other Fulbright events. The 65th anniversary is something I think we will be mentioning throughout the year because it is kind of a very important historical achievement to be, 65 years is a long time for two countries to, your whole lifetime, Hisham, yeah, to be involved in such an important endeavor. There was no way we were able to finish this topic. This topic will take several weeks, I think, to actually give us justice to that topic. But I think these are the kinds of events and kinds of dialogue that will help us get to some, really good ideas and some good solutions on the way forward. So I want to thank you for having me, and look forward to talking after the break. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adnan. My job is easy. I get to read and thank everybody. And I just want to second the optimist part. At Fulbright, we're very optimistic. We can afford to be optimistic. We work with students. We work with bright young people. We catch them bright. We send them off to get brighter, and then we catch them back as very, very bright alumni. So we're very honored to have our alumni here. And we're very excited about how we're celebrating our 65th anniversary. I've only been in Cairo in this position since October, but I'm taking credit for all the success shamelessly. And we've had two 65th celebration roundtables. one on education, this one on the economy, and these will lead to our capstone conference in the fall, which we look forward to having you all come back and honor us at the capstone conference. It's our first webinar. We're reaching out to our American alumni, and so we're very delighted to have people join us from the US as well as from the different governorates. So we're reaching out to our Egyptian alumni outside Cairo. And we're very, very grateful for the Chamber of Commerce to host us. We look forward to more technology in the 21st century, but our infrastructure does not have the bandwidth to host it at the Commission. We're very grateful for Hisham as a speaker and as a friend of the Commission and his team. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to Dr. Khalid and Dr. Mahmoud for their insights and for taking the time to be with us. I'd like to thank Dr. Ashraf Hatem, our chair, who's a great supporter of the Commission, Mr. Adnan Siddiqui, and Mr. Tom Crehan, who's also a board member, for their support. I'd like to thank our guests from the Ministries of Higher Education and Foreign Affairs, our friends from the embassy, Mark, Nihal, and Mohammed. Thank you very much for coming. University presidents, deans, professors, esteemed guests, our alumni. And I'd like a very, very special thank you to my team who have worked very hard on this. And I have 4 people to thank. Rania, Amira, and Iman, can you stand up, please? And you 3? Thank you very, very much. So thank you all very much, and there is a reception in the room in the back. I'd like to invite you to network and socialize and get to thank you again in person. Thank you very much.